The first blow to the concrete floor hardly made a mark. In the cramped basement of a tidy house in Erie, Pennsylvania, detectives took turns with the sledgehammer, sweat beading on their foreheads despite the winter cold outside. A green indoor-outdoor carpet had covered most of the room, rolled back now like a rug hiding a stain. They weren't tearing up the floor for a plumbing problem. They were looking for a missing woman from Ohio, a wife whose husband said she had simply walked away from her life. Each swing of the hammer sent dust into the air and rattled the shelves along the wall. At last, the concrete cracked. An officer set the hammer aside, dropped to his knees, and scraped at the soft spot with a shovel. The blade sank deeper than it should have. Beneath the concrete lay loose fill, as if someone had poured it in a hurry. The detectives exchanged a look and kept digging. 6 inches down, the shovel hit something that wasn't rock. A scrap of green tarp curled out of the dirt. They peeled it back and saw pale human skin. The excavation stopped. Evidence markers came out. An investigator stepped forward, swallowing hard as he checked a watch still clinging to the wrist. It was a custom Rolex, engraved on the back with a woman's name, Noreen Boyle. To understand how she ended up under a stranger's basement floor in another state, you have to go back to Mansfield, Ohio, at the end of the 1980s. On paper, the Boyle family looked like success. John Boyle was a respected osteopathic doctor with a large brick house on West 4th Street and a polished reputation in town. Noreen was known as a bright, kind woman who loved her 2 children, 11-year-old Collier and 3-year-old Elizabeth. Behind closed doors, the picture was different. Noreen confided in friends that John could be controlling and cruel. She knew about his affairs. The most serious was with a nurse named Sherry Campbell. John didn't just want a fling. He wanted a new life. He bought a house in Erie where Sherry and their daughter could live, and he made regular trips there while Noreen stayed in Ohio, trying to hold the family together and quietly planning a divorce. On December 30th, 1989, Noreen was on the phone with a friend. Her mother-in-law, Christine, was staying the night at the house in Mansfield. On the call, Noreen tried to make light of the tension building in her marriage. She joked, "Well, it looks like Jack isn't going to murder me tonight. His mother is staying over." Hours later, that line stopped being funny. Around 3 a.m, Collier woke to a sound he would never forget. A sharp scream from his parents' bedroom, followed by 2 heavy thuds. He froze in his bed, listening to the house go quiet again. In another room, Elizabeth, sleeping beside her mother, would later say she had seen her father strike Noreen. No one called the police. Whatever happened in that bedroom played out behind a closed door while the children lay awake in the dark. By morning, Noreen was gone. When Collier went looking for her, he found his father sitting oddly calm in the living room. John told him, almost casually, that his mother had gone on a little vacation. There was no suitcase missing, no note, no rushed goodbye the night before. John's mother backed his story and warned Collier not to talk to police. The boy felt the pressure immediately. He knew something was wrong, but the adults closest to him insisted he stay quiet. 2 days later, a friend reported Noreen missing. Detectives came to the house. John Boyle refused to file his own report and calmly told them she had run off before and would return. There was no suitcase gone, no sign of a struggle, and no body to prove a crime. The case could have stalled right there, if not for Collier. The 11-year-old pulled one of the detectives aside. Away from his father and grandmother, his fear poured out. He told the investigator about the scream in the night, the thuds, his father's strange calm, the threats that followed. He described how John had been making regular trips to Erie and had recently bought a house there under another woman's name. It was a lot for a child to carry, but it was enough to give detectives a direction. Investigators learned that Dr. Boyle had insisted on taking possession of the Erie house by January 1st, 1990. He had asked unusual questions about whether the basement floor could be lowered. Workers recalled seeing him strain his muscles moving something heavy there, then asking his son to rub liniment into his back. In the dead of winter, when everyone kept windows shut, Boyle had insisted the basement windows remain open. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened into something terrible. The doctor had not only killed his wife, he had planned where to hide her long before he carried out the crime. Armed with Collier's statements and the suspicious timeline, police obtained a warrant to search the Erie property. On January 25, 1990, investigators headed straight for the basement. What they found under the freshly painted floor and rolled-back carpet confirmed their worst suspicions. The body they unearthed was nude and wrapped in plastic. A bag had been tied over the woman's head. The Rolex watch on her wrist had stopped on December 31st, 1989, the exact night Collier heard the scream. The autopsy showed blunt force trauma to the head and suffocation. Noreen Boyle had been beaten and then smothered. Forensic analysis tied fibers, concrete dust, and other trace evidence back to Boyle's movements between Mansfield and Erie. The story he told, that someone else must have killed his wife and planted her body in his house, fell apart under basic scrutiny. In January, a grand jury indicted John Boyle for aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. The trial began in the summer of 1990 and quickly drew public attention. In the courtroom, the polished doctor tried to project confidence, but the most devastating testimony didn't come from forensic experts. It came from his son. Collier took the stand at 11 years old. Small in the witness chair, he looked out at the jury and described the last night he heard his mother's voice. He told them about the scream, the thuds, his father's odd calm, the threats to keep him from calling police, and the trips to Erie. Jurors watched a child relive the break of his family in front of the man who caused it. The defense tried to cast doubt. They suggested that Noreen had enemies, that she might have met someone else, that an unknown killer could have used Boyle's property without his knowledge. But every attempt to shift blame ran into the same wall. The timeline, the Erie house purchased under another woman's name, the fresh concrete, the watch stopped on the night she disappeared, and a son who had nothing to gain by accusing his own father. After days of testimony, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. Boyle was sentenced to 20 years to life, plus additional time for desecrating his wife's body. He has maintained his innocence ever since, insisting that he was framed and that the evidence was misunderstood. Yet one question still lingers. Boyle did not plan this life alone. People around him watched him grow more desperate in the weeks before Noreen vanished. They saw him splitting his time between a wife in Ohio and a mistress in Pennsylvania. They knew about the Erie house and the concrete in the basement. No jury ever weighed whether they helped him or simply looked away. What is certain is this: Noreen Boyle did not walk out of her life. She was silenced in the dark of her own bedroom, driven across state lines, and buried under a stranger's feet. It took the courage of an 11-year-old to make sure the truth didn't stay sealed in concrete with her. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.